Hello, F2 Fan 5000 here with driver ratings for the 2026 Australian Grand Prix F2 round. Now, before I get into driver ratings, I want to mention a couple of things that affect the overall performance of the weekend. Firstly, in the qualifying, there's a red flag, and after the red flag, all the drivers get one shootout lap basically to set a fastest time. And I think in these conditions sometimes we don't get representative qualifying times. And in the feature race we've seen a full-blown safety car in the middle of the race, and that affects the outcome in various ways, especially if drivers up the front have built up a gap to the drivers behind, and the safety car takes that sort of gap, the advantage they built up, it takes it away, and then we're left, and then they can be overtaken and can change positions that otherwise would not have changed. So I really don't like having the safety cars in the F2 feature race. I feel as though the final result is not fully representative. However, because most of the drivers were on the same strategy, and because it wasn't that easy to overtake at Albert Park, then I feel as though the final result is fairly indicative of where the drivers were, although some incidents and some reliability have perhaps taken out some key players. So into the driver ratings, Rafael Camara gets a 9 out of 10. He kept it in the feature race. He's kept his nose clean, let the other people around him have accidents, and he's come away with a solid second place, and he's equal second in the championship. It's a good start for Camara. Obviously, Invicta, as you can see, are one of the most professional teams on the grid. When some of the other cars are having all these incidents that get penalised or whatever, pit stop infringements, pit lane, all this sort of stuff, you never see that happen with Invicta. Joshua Dirksen gets a 7 out of 10. He was excellent in the sprint race, but in qualifying and in the feature race, he's not in the competition for the lead. He's only in competition for minor points, which I think would be disappointing because he would be expected to be fighting for the championship in the Invicta car, and he doesn't look as though he will. Ritamo Miyata gets an 8 out of 10. His qualifying is not particularly impressive. However, his race pace was excellent. He came through the field on both occasions with good overtakes, and he's finished 5th in both races. So it's a very good start for Ritamo Miyata. It just remains to be seen if he can keep this level up all year, or hopefully he can build on it and fight for podiums on a more regular basis. Colton Herta gets a 7 out of 10. I think it was a good first weekend, but nothing special. He's got 7th place in the feature race. That would have been 8th place without that. There was 8th place on the road. Obviously, the drivers around him had penalties, so he gets promoted to 7th place. This looks like a steep learning curve for Colton Herta, but he's definitely not drowning either, so he gets a reasonable 7 out of 10. Noel Leon, he gets a 4 out of 10. In the feature race, he's bumped into Oliver Goethe, has broken his wing, and he's absolutely squandered points. The Campos looks to be a very good car to drive, looks very competitive, and the fact that he's come up 14th place in the feature race is very disappointing. A lot of squandered opportunity, but as I said, in the sprint race, he's come a fine second place. Other drivers around him had their incidents, so he gets a 4 out of 10. Nikola Solov, he gets a 10 out of 10. Excellent first weekend for Solov. In the sprint race, he was a bit sloppy, but in the feature race, he's had an excellent controlled race. Kept ahead of his rival Camara. He's dealt with Nicholas Varone very handily. He drove superbly. There's not much else you can say about Nikola Solov. Dino Beganovic gets a 6 out of 10. He did put it on pole position and showed a lot of pace, and I think he should have finished on the podium. When you consider everything, I think that Beganovic should have been on the podium, so I'll give him a +1 for his pace. So he gets 6 out of 10, 5 for the neutral rating for the DNF, and +1 for his pace, so 6. His teammate Roman Belinsky also gets a 6. A decent first weekend in Formula 2. Nothing special, but he scored points in the sprint race, failed to score points in the feature race, but was not involved in any incidents that were televised. So it's something that Belinsky can build on, so he gets a reasonable 6 out of 10. Gabriele Mini gets a 5 out of 10. His car broke down in the qualifying. He's had to start at the back, and in both races, about half the way through, he's made great progress, and then he stalls out, makes little mistakes and drops back. And I think for a driver in the position of Gabriele Mini, that's not good enough from Gabriele Mini, and I think 5 is generous. I think, especially in the sprint race, you could see he could have been on the podium in the sprint race, but he had little mistakes, and that's cost him. And the same thing happened in the feature race. He got stalled out in the battle for the minor points, and if he wants to show that he's worthy for F1, he needs to do better than that. He has a good car underneath him, and his teammate Oliver Goethe came 4th in the feature race. I'll give him a 7 out of 10. Goethe's a very experienced driver by this point, and fourth place is sort of, I think the MP have a good car in the F2 series, so 4th is what's expected. Plus, he's had a good spin in the sprint race. Spun, I think that was all on his own. I think the commentator said he was touched, but I don't think so. So it's sort of just bare minimum in terms of impressing, though he's had a better weekend than Gabriele Mini. So Oliver Goethe gets a 7 out of 10. And then coming to the Prema team, wow, they really stink now. But Sebastian Montoya was able to get small points here and there. So I'll give him a 6 out of 10. But Mari Boyer, he gets a 0 out of 10. He's crashed in qualifying. He's had no pace in either race. 0 points. He's more of an object of sympathy, not an object of reverence after this weekend. We just think, oh, poor Mari Boyer, he's struggling, and a bit like the Aston Martin F1 team. It's a bit like that, isn't it? So Boyer gets a 0. Absolutely no pace all weekend. Look, he was absolutely crushed by Sebastian Montoya. It brings us to the Rodin, the unfortunate Rodin pairing. Martinius Stenson had a fantastic pace all weekend and barely has any points to show for it. A penalty given to him in the sprint race, so the penalty's often stupid. And in the feature race, we know what happened to him. So he gets a 5 out of 10, a neutral rating, because he was crashed out of the feature race. And Alex Dunn, remember last year in Monaco, I gave him that -10 rating. Well, no, not today. But I'll give him a -5. He didn't take out half the field, but he spoiled his own reputation. He spoiled his race. He spoiled his teammates' race. So -5, I think, is a good rating for Alex Dunn. And, you know, you're saying, why are you giving out minus ratings? Well, it's when a driver, remember the F2 is the road to F1, the minus represents when you've had such a bad race that you're spoiling your reputation and you're ruining your chances. You know, after this race, I can't imagine that Alex Dunn could be the favourite in the sprint race. I thought he learned his lesson, he kept his nose clean, picked up a podium in the sprint race, but in the feature race. And I think Roden overall have the fastest driver pairing. I think the Roden car is very good in race conditions. They were battling, him and his teammate were battling for the lead. It should have been a 1-2 for Roden, if we're being honest. So that's some of these other drivers on the podium probably shouldn't have been there. I mean, the podium probably should have been Stensonaire and Dunn and Bogdanovic, right? That should have been the podium, but because this is the problem with Formula 2, you don't always get the result that reflects the true pace. But is that the true pace of the car setup or the driver? That's another hard thing to determine. But you can, I suppose, when I see teams like Trident making the podium, when I see even VAR made the podium last year, AIX, so I don't think the variation between teams is as great as some people on the internet make it out to be. But I do think that obviously the Roden car is in a good spot, and you'd be expecting Stensonaire and Alex Dunn to be on the podium in the feature races on a regular basis. They've come up with barely any points. Even the guy on the pit wall, you know, don't forget the drivers are paying for the F2, but the guy on the pit wall, you know, the Roden guy, he's like, you know, he can't believe he's so upset that they've thrown away a 1-2 with this crash. And coming to ART, I think ART are impressing a bit this year. So Kushmani gets a 1 out of 10 because he's qualified well, and then in the races he just goes backwards and backwards and backwards. He has no pace. But Tazanopol in Trafuvazak, I'll give him an 8 out of 10. He scored points in both races over the weekend. He's actually 5th in the championship. Can you believe that the end of last year, when Tazanopol found that form at Campos in F3, suddenly improved. He's carried that over to F2. That's fantastic to see. He gets an 8 out of 10. AIX, I think my pre-season prediction, they won't score any points, is fairly safe. Emerson Fittipaldi is reasonable. I'll give him a 5 out of 10 because it's AIX, it's his first weekend, but he's no threat to the points table. And Keen Shields, I'll give him a 3 out of 10 because, you know, he's been so far behind Nicholas Verone at the end. He's so far behind. They're on the same strategy, remember? And they have a safety car halfway through the race, so they're nice and close on the road. Perhaps there's a few cars between them, but Shields drops. He's over 20 seconds behind Verone at the end, so that's the sort of pace Shields has. VAR, Nico Verone gets a 7 out of 10. I think he was so much faster than Shields, and he's shown a good fight at the front to try and get some points. It was all for nothing in the end, but he definitely showed he's there to fight hard. I think leading the race will give him some confidence that he'll need going forward to be a strong driver in this championship, even though VAR usually struggle. Rafael Villagomez gets a 6 out of 10. I think he was on the edge of points in the feature race. Generally unremarkable. And then coming to Trident, right, so all the people that talk about the big gaps between the cars in F2, well, Lawrence Van Hoopen put it on the podium in the feature race, on the podium, and what a fantastic result. This team only scored 2 points the whole of last season, 2 points, and Lawrence Van Hoopen gets a 10 out of 10. He scored 18 points in one race. It's just amazing. And it also highlights what a bad job that John Bennett's been doing, so I'll give him a 3 out of 10. He's nowhere near the points, nowhere near him. He's hovering around the back. He looks weak. He looks out of depth. The job that Van Hoopen did here has shone a light on what a poor job John Bennett's been doing, and I think it just emphasises, how much difference the drivers make. I remember in 2024 the online discussion, Paul Aaron, rocket ship, high-tech rocket ship, but now they're struggling. Last year they weren't as competitive, and now they're not on the podium. Obviously, the car has a better setup, and I think that's because of the work that Hi-Tech did in the pre-season back in 2024 with Paul Aaron and Omri Cordell. They put in so many laps. That's why they have a nicely set up car. Well, I think if you look back, you can see that in 2024 they're here, 2025 they're here, 2026 they don't look as competitive. Remember, Paul Aaron was on the podium here 2 years ago, so I think a lot of the discussion about where drivers are with the cars is a bit over the top, although I have to say there's definitely difference between the cars, that's for sure. That's why Van Hoopen gets a 10 for getting a podium in a Trident, and Camara gets 9 for finishing in the Invicta, 1 place ahead. Yeah, but I just decry I feel as though when we look at these results, we're not getting the full picture of who's really fast, who's not fast, because I know it's just a bit chaotic, the junior racing series. But I also, in some way, miss a driver like Fornaroli, who just gets out there and always scores points, because these drivers, well, I suppose Rafael Camara is driving like that. He's very careful around other drivers. He understands the value in finishing the race, and it's interesting that he's in that Invicta team, and it was also he's the one that took that spot in. But as I say, I remember Camara got caught up in an incident in the sprint race, so it's not quite the same. I actually miss drivers like that when I see drivers in F2 and F3 just throwing away results. They're fourth in the feature race, and or third or whatever, or fifth, they're scoring good points and they throw it away with bonsai moves to try and get another position, and instead they end up taking another driver out. I'm not just talking about Alex Dunn, I'm talking about across the board. This happens in F2 and F3, and you think about the money that's being paid to be on that F2 grid. It's a lot of money, and to me it just, I really respect that driver that respects the fact that there's a lot of money being spent, and this is a fantastic opportunity, and I don't think there's enough recognition for drivers like that, because this isn't an expensive sport, and a lot of people at the end of last year were saying, oh, well, you know, the Fornaroli's not quite as fast as these drivers. Well, he gets the results, you know, and I think Camara could be that guy this year. But I think even Solov and Camara are getting mixed up in incidents in the sprint race, you know. So we'll see how it pans out. There should be an interesting year. There's quite I'm excited about how Solov is fast, Camara's fast. The two Rodens look like they should be leading the championship. This is my point, right? Stenson there, done. They should have been 1-2 in that race. I think no question about that. They were so much faster than they were in the groove, right? And they've chucked it away. It's a complete waste. It's a waste of their money and the teams going all the way to Australia. You know, it's a complete waste. Bogdanovic is another one, but that's not his fault, right? But I think those 5 drivers, Solov, Camara, let me say it again. Those 5 drivers, Solov, Camara, the 2 Roden drivers, Stenson there, done, and Bogdanovic, they all look quick, like they could fight for the championship, at least based on this one weekend, and we know that the pecking order changes rapidly from one weekend to the other. And I think Gabriele Mini could be up there. I think he has the pace to be up there fighting for the championship. But I'm not sure if he's going to let... but I have a feeling he might let silly mistakes get in the way, and that'll cost him. Let's see how some of the other drivers go. This is only the first race, and I hope that we get a full 14 races this year, but it's not looking likely at the moment, which is honestly devastating. Didn't you see how exciting that race was yesterday? That was really, like, it's so much fun to watch F2 and F3, and if we lose 2 rounds, it's just devastating. Maybe they can maybe they can have 3 races at some of the scheduled tracks, especially if it's a weekend where there's no F1 sprint race. There's a bit of opening where they can go and have a couple of feature races just to help us make up. But it also puts drivers on the back foot going forward, because they can't really prove themselves if they're not really having races until June. When I mean that, I'm talking about F1, even a little bit F Formula E as well, because you think about it, in the F1, the silly season happens in around August or July, and these F2, as most of the races they only had this one race and potentially not going to race again until June, so they don't really have time to prove what they can do. And who knows who we might see actually win the championship in the end. We don't really know at this stage. It may not be Camara or Solov. It could be someone else. And we have all these races that are happening later in the year. So it's sort of negative from that perspective. It'd be better if there are more F2 races earlier in the year. And as I said, even something like Formula E, the Generation 4 is coming up, and they want to they'll want to be like getting their driver lineup sorted, because they start racing in December, but probably around the time of the scheduled Abu Dhabi round for F2, and if you're just, they don't want to be waiting for F2 to finish to sort out their lineups either, especially with that major regulation change coming in Formula E. So this late in the calendar racing is not really good for the F2 drivers. I don't think it'll be clear who's going to be challenging for the title until the end of September, and I think for silly season in both Formula 1 and Formula E, it's a little bit late, so it's unfortunate. But anyway, based on the race that we just had this weekend, as I said, the 5 drivers I mentioned, Solov, Kamara, Stenson, Dunn, and though Dunn is, I don't know if he's going to stop crashing or not. If he keeps having incidents like that, he's going to take himself out of title contention. So, and of course, Bogdanovic and potentially Gabriele Mini. I think these, but anyway, those 6 drivers definitely have the pace to fight for the championship. Also, I promised my subscribers at the end of last year that I would sneak in some F1 driver ratings in the F2 video. So I should keep the promise, and I'll have some. And I know there's already hundreds and hundreds of people making F1 content, so I want to avoid it, but I want to give my very few but loyal F2 subscribers, F2 fans that subscribe to watch my videos, I want to give them a special treat, because you get my unique, I don't know how special it is, but my unique take on the F1 as well. Because if you follow F2, I'm assuming you watch the F1 race. If you don't watch F1, I don't really blame you. I feel it's more, I know, there's the things I don't like about F1, but I did say that the new F1 cars will be a lot better than the doom predictions that were coming in from F1 media outlets like The Race and Planet F1 said it'll be a disaster, and I had my little video that said no, I don't think so, and I think I've been proven right. The Australian Grand Prix wasn't really a classic race, but it's definitely a lot better than, much better than people were saying it would be. So 1-0 to me, in my opinion, against the average F1 media. But for my driver ratings, start with McLaren. Lando Norris gets a 7. Out-qualified by Oscar Piastri, although it's not really his fault for running over the debris. I'm sure it's very hard to see that. I don't know how to rate his race too well, because I don't really see anything special, but he did okay. Obviously, the McLaren car is not where the Mercedes should be. Oscar Piastri gets a neutral 5 out of 10 because his car broke down. Well, yeah, more or less he has some sort of issue with his car which caused a crash. Coming to Mercedes, George Russell gets a 9. He had a very clinical weekend. He's an excellent sandbagger, and when the sandbags came off, he did the job. That said, because his car is so much better than the other drivers, I don't see how this was any special race performance. And also give Andrea Antonelli, he gets a 9 out of 10. He's slightly more impressed with Kimi because he had to overcome issues. He had to crash in FP3. I know that's his fault that he crashed to a point, but I can sort of understand, the new generation of car going flat out for the first time. I don't want to punish someone for, big crash, but minor mistake. And he sort of come back from that to qualify in the front row, finish second. He was quite a fair way back near the beginning of the race, but then his closed up towards the George Russell over the course of the race. Coming to Red Bull, Max Verstappen gets a 7. The crash in qualifying is not his fault. He's come through the field, but he sort of stalled out once he got near the places you'd expect him to be in. Isaac Hadjar gets a 6 out of 10. He gets 5 points for the neutral 5 out of 10 rating for the fact that he didn't finish a DNF, but he gets an extra point because of his fantastic qualifying. And Charles Leclerc gets an 8. I was impressed with how he fought for the lead of the race, and I don't think there's much more he could have done, but he's a little bit slow, I would say, compared to Lewis Hamilton in the second half of the race. And Lewis and Hamilton also gets an 8. In the race he had strong race pace, so that's a positive for him, and he was close to Charles Leclerc at the checkered flag. At Williams, Alex Albon gets a 6 out of 10. Now, I think that's a bit harsh. I think he deserves a 7 because I think the Williams car is, quite frankly, a pile of horse shit, and he's basically done all that he can do. And Carlos Sainz gets a 5 out of 10, basically a neutral rating because there's not much he could do in that race. Coming to Racing Bulls, Liam Lawson gets a 4 out of 10. It's not really his fault, but you see, he's had trouble getting off the line. I don't really want to punish him for that, but I feel his race pace after that was substantially behind that of his teammate. And Arvid Lindblad gets a 9 out of 10 on debut. Fantastic weekend from Arvid Lindblad. Very impressed with Arvid Lindblad. Absolutely deserves to be in F1. Actually, in qualifying, Lawson got the better of him. I think he made a lock-up on his final flying lap. But in the race, he was flawless, was charging at the front for a while before I think the limitations of the Racing Bull saw him drop back. That could even be, tyres. And then coming to Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso gets a 7 out of 10, but it's really an NA rating because I know that he's done a really good job it's a neutral rating, but he's done a good job to get the car, almost got it into Q2, was briefly running in the top 10. So it's an incredible job by Fernando Alonso. And Lance Stroll also gets a 7 out of 10. It's meant to be a neutral rating, but I know he's worked really hard to finish most of the race in difficult circumstances. Coming to Haas, Oliver Bearman, he gets a 10 out of 10. I think he absolutely maximised every bit of the car. I would say he over-delivered. The fact that he was able to come through the midfield and even overtake Arvid Lindblad, who was a long way ahead in the early stages of the race. And he's put a decent gap on his teammate, and his teammate is a good driver. So I think Oliver Bearman, star of the day for me. Esteban Ocon gets a 6 out of 10. He had a nice battle with Pierre Gasly. I think he finished 11th, so missing out on a point, but not too bad from Esteban Ocon, but definitely beaten by his teammate. Nico Hulkenberg gets a 5 neutral rating because he doesn't even start the race. Gabriel Bortoleto also gets a 10 out of 10. I think that was he absolutely maximised the potential of that car. He drove fantastically, in my opinion. He came the way he was able to hustle Arvid Lindblad, and I feel like the Racing Bulls is in a better position than the Audi. So I think that's fantastic work from Gabriel Bortoleto. Pierre Gasly, he gets a 7 out of 10. That's a little bit harsh. I think he deserves an 8 because I think Alpine are a little bit slightly ahead of Williams. That's all I can say about it, really. They're only very slightly ahead, and he's actually come away with a World Championship point. I think it's very, very good job by Pierre Gasly. He was able to fight with Esteban Ocon for all those laps, swapping positions. That was good to see. So, yeah, 8 out of 10, no doubt. Franco Colapinto, I'll give him a 4 out of 10. I'm not happy that he got a stop-and-go penalty for... I don't know what reason he got a stop-and-go penalty for. I think other than that, he was generally behind Pierre Gasly. So I'll give him a 4 out of 10. And Sergio Perez gets a 7 out of 10. I think he soldiered on very well in difficult circumstances. Valtteri Bottas gets a 5, a neutral rating. His car broke down though. I think it has to be said, Perez looked as though he had the measure of Bottas all weekend. I hope you enjoyed listening to my insights.